The Kremlin today is jailing the very officers who are in charge of keeping its army running. 17 generals have been arrested in the past 3 years. This number of flag officers arrested in the middle of a war is unprecedented in modern military history. For that same period of time, by comparison, the United States, the UK, France, and Germany combined arrested 0 generals. However, this purge, it's not just a bunch of background noise. This purge is the system's main driver of failure. What we're seeing right now is that the purge is breaking the Putin machine. The FSB's military counterintelligence is opening cases day after day against more Russian officers. And everybody knows that when the FSB comes knocking late at night at your door, you are going to be found guilty. It will be rubber stamped and away you will go. But what's interesting is that the targets are the generals that are in charge of things like logistics, procurement, and transport. Those are the ones who have the signatures that control movement. So when those officers are purged, that means that the signatures stop. And when the signatures stop, the supplies stop. And that means that today, officers are scared of taking any sort of risk, issuing orders. And that means that the situation gets worse for Russia on the battlefield. Today, fear has become the most efficient weapon ripping through the officer corps of Russia. Today, it's also very clear that the FSB is not simply purging corruption. It is, however, waging an internal war against the Ministry of Defense and the National Guard, Rosguardia. Today, though, it creates something else. It creates hesitation. It creates a fear to sign documents. And when things are not signed, it means that logistics do not move. All of these things are working together to create what will become a ticking time bomb. My name is Jason Smart, and I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post and a national security advisor who studies Russia. So what's going on right now is sort of incredible, because it is across Russia that we see these problems getting worse, and every one of them builds on the other one. It might seem totally unrelated, what we see in Pokrovsk, what we see in Crimea, and what we see happening in Moscow. But in fact, it is all parts of the same story. The story of a system that is ailing, broken, and quickly dissolving. But it's probably worst of all in Crimea. Crimea, of course, is weakened. It has had its defenses degraded. Ukraine is regularly carrying out attacks on its radar and other defensive systems. And of course, Crimea cannot count on the Black Sea Fleet that has been moved over 400 kilometers, 250 miles, away to Novorossiysk due to fear of Ukrainian drones. Just look at Crimea over the past few months. We saw the attacks on the Nebo-M radars. We saw Podlet. We saw also how there was routinely attacks on the fuel trains there. We saw the attacks at the bridge. We saw the attacks on the military bases. We've seen the attacks on the radar stations. We've seen the attacks on the air defense systems. It's pretty clear that attacking Crimea is not very challenging for Ukraine. However, Crimea is not unique. The same stress which we see today there is the one that we see nationwide. This is because this is systemic. It is across all of Russia that we see the situation worsening. On September 29th, the government had to cap fuel sales. It froze the price across the country. By the 30th of September, Moscow extended the gasoline export ban and imposed a partial diesel ban across all of Russia. That's because 40%, according to the Moscow Times, 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity has now been destroyed. The shortages in Moscow and St. Petersburg mirror what we see across the country. There's empty pumps and people standing in long lines. And the reason we know this is factual is because the Russians themselves are posting online. Russian citizens are upset. They are angry at these shortages. And they should probably be very angry, because it is actually the FSB's fault. It's not just because they are persecuting things like the military elite and the officer corps. It's something else. You might recall that just recently, in the past couple months, the transport minister of Russia decided to, quote unquote, commit suicide. It was also the very same day that his assistant, his deputy, also had a fatal heart attack by coincidence, and it was within an hour of them being fired by Putin. But what you might notice about this, that's very important, is that the transport minister of Russia has a lot of different hats that he wears. Among them is fuel movement and distribution across the country. But since they got rid of him, and they got rid of the people around him, because the FSB wished to control fuel, knowing that it's valuable, knowing that they can make money from it, the government was left without somebody who was adequate to actually manage this. They were left without the capacity to actually make sure that the country had fuel. That's not a very good thing for Russia. Without fuel, your country slows down pretty fast. But today, that is just one of the secondary effects that we see. In the same way that getting rid of the transport minister means that there's nobody to distribute the fuel, going after the officers means that they are scared to sign any documents. They understand that every purge creates hesitation, which then means there's delays, which then makes shortages. And then they have to start a new purge again because they need a scapegoat as to why things are going wrong. But in the Eastern Front, we see something fascinating. We see what the Russians are suffering in Pokrovsk. Around Pokrovsk in the Donetsk Oblast, Ukrainian counterattacks have fixed Russian brigades and pinned rail time and truck columns. Right there, we are seeing how staff officers have avoided signing redeployment orders. We see that there are cases of purges of the officers even there. So as we see that Russia is lacking the number of soldiers that it needs, we might ask why that is. What are the origins? Well, it's not just Pokrovsk where they lack the soldiers they need. It's anywhere that Russia might immediately need soldiers. Redeployments are being frozen because nobody wants to sign the orders. Nobody wants to take responsibility for choosing to shift around the soldiers, which is not a very healthy thing when you realize that any time an attack could come. But there's another reason that Russia is in a very bad situation, and we can do the math ourselves to see why it is so serious. I would argue there's probably about a 60-day horizon or a buffer zone that the Russians have at this point. Consider this. A Russian motorized rifle brigade, it consumes about 200 or 250 tons of diesel per day. A single rail convoy, it carries about 1,000 tons of fuel. So that's roughly 5 brigade days for one unit at that tempo. And there's another aspect of this as well. Right now in Crimea, they lack radar. It will take several weeks, perhaps months, to be able to fix it. So what happens if Ukraine were to attack Crimea right now? What if it attacked the supply of fuel? Just consider this. 2 missed resupplies turns the brigades into not having their operational minimums. This means that they will not be able to sustain themselves. If they cannot sustain themselves, how can they fight off a Ukrainian offensive? How can they prevent Ukraine from liberating the peninsula? But there's something else that goes on right now. We see that the Russian military, due to lack of fuel, due to lack of supplies, due to lack of cash from Moscow, they lack basic materials. Increasingly, we've seen the videos of the under-equipped Russian soldiers being sent out with virtually no training and ending up in a very bad situation as Ukrainian drones encounter them. Ukraine is doing incredible things with drones. In fact, it's doing amazing things with drones, things that the Russians could never imagine. Now, the Russians, of course, fear the Ukrainian drones, and they should fear the Ukrainian drones because they can come at any time. But there's something else that makes the Ukrainian drones really incredible, and this is something with which we are currently working. Recently, there was 2 different videos that came out. One of a Ukrainian drone attacking a Russian Melina, another one attacking a Russian Zala reconnaissance drone. What's incredible is that we contributed to building those drones. These incredible drones, taking the Russian drones out of the sky, are things that we played a direct role in. And they're the reason that I will leave in the first comment below, pinned, how you can contribute by PayPal or bank transfer to help the Ukrainian soldiers get the drones they need to save lives, but also to get the drones they need to make sure that Russia loses. Overall, the situation is not good for Russia, but that is not new. What's new in this situation, however, is how acutely bad the situation has become. It's become a situation where it's very clear that there is a chain of events playing on each other. What we see in Pokrovsk, the Russians are losing territory. What we see in Crimea is becoming weakened. We see on the fronts between Ukraine and Russia, formerly called borders, the Russians are understaffed. They don't have enough soldiers. And in a day, could Ukraine perhaps start something like a new step into Kursk? Most certainly it could. The Russians don't have the capacity to stop it right now. And that's why we see this optimism from President Zelensky, even from President Trump. It seems very clear there's very serious doubts if the Russians could stop the Ukrainians at this point. Looking ahead, what should we expect though? What should we expect in real terms and when? Well, first, we must acknowledge that the jail generals are creating a command paralysis, and that is creating a paralysis for the convoys. Those slow convoys expose crossings, and that exposes crossings which then are struck by the Ukrainians, and that further reduces the amount of fuel. Reduced fuel lowers maneuver tempo. It also means that there's going to be a weakened air defense. It also means that there's going to be longer repair times. Each one of these things is working in tandem. Each new court case against a Russian general means that there will be fewer convoys departing. It means that, therefore, on the trench, the Russians will be weaker. It means that though it's far away in Moscow, Perekop or Sivash are now going to be left exposed. And maintaining this pressure for 60 days, this means that it could make sustaining Crimea unsustainable for both military and civic purposes. And it's at that point that the liberation becomes a logistics inevitability, because the purge, it timed the collapse itself. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments below. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, consider becoming a channel member. And as always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.